Hello there and welcome back to another video. Today I'll be doing a back-to-back video, volume 2. I did the first one, which was Immortals Blizzard Beasts and their At the Heart of Winter album. That was about a month ago. I just wanted to do something different rather than collection updates and all that kind of stuff. It went pretty well and I enjoyed dissecting both those albums. So I'm back with part 2 or volume 2. So hopefully I can continue doing a few of those ones. Today we got Enslaved, going through their Frost and Eld album. I could have actually picked a few back-to-back albums from their whole discography. You know, when I thought about it, up until Rune, obviously, you know, some of their later stuff is quite different as well, but I found that up until Rune, you know, basically all the albums were, you know, different back to back. It was, you know, I could have picked Bloodhem going on to Mardrum going on to Monumention, for example. Even the first album, Viking League of Veldy, going on to Frost. But I opted to Frost going to Eld. You know, there was some lineup changes happening at that stage as well. But just in general sound and style, I thought it was sort of fit the format of you know, two sort of different albums, and you know, like not a stylistic change, but just, yeah, they were sort of heading in a slightly different direction as they always did, and probably continue to do so. I haven't really kept up with Enslaved. I'd say post I reckon the last one I really delved into was Ritir, or maybe the one before it, Axioma. I've sort of lost track after, you know, say the last decade. So whether or not they're doing great stuff or not, I just haven't really kept up with them too much. They've obviously grown in popularity in that period, and you know, they're obviously still doing good stuff. But what I have heard from that later era, it tended to sound a bit the same, maybe production wise and stuff like that. You know, I'm not sort of talking shit about what they're doing now or anything, but I for me to comment on their later material, I'd have to sit down and really go through it a bit more. But I'm more adept at talking about, you know, I'd say up until Vertebrae Axioma era, I'd say. So we'll kick it off, and there's probably no need to go through like some sort of a bio with Enslaved. They're a very influential and well-known Norwegian band who was sort of aligned with that early black metal sort of period. And I will just sort of go into the album. We'll start with Frost, obviously. That was their 1994 album. So we got Frost, released on August the 4th, 1994, from the very influential label at the time, Osmose Productions, who they spent quite a few albums with. And going through when it was recorded at Grieg Holland Studios during June, July 94, and obviously released in August. So there wasn't a whole big wait. You know, some albums are recorded and they come out 6 months, maybe even 9 months later or worse. So pretty much they got in, smashed it out, and it was done finished in July and released in August. So very quick work by the label there just to get it out. You know, Frost to me was an album that took a long time for me to get into it. I first heard it in 1995. I bought it and I didn't really sort of grasp it at the time. You know, I was very much into like Satyricon and Dark Throne. And while I liked certain songs from the Frost album and enjoyed sections of it as a whole, I just couldn't really grasp it and fully enjoy it. That would change later on. But it wasn't this album that opened Enslaved up for me. It was probably going forward, I'd say around the Mardrum era, maybe definitely Bloodhem I really enjoyed. But yeah, it was sort of around that sort of period where I those albums opened up Enslaved for me, really got into those, and then I delved right backwards into their earlier stuff. And obviously I still owned Frost, but and sort of got back into that and was like, what the hell was I thinking? So you know, I've got the one of the most sort of recent, I think it's a 2019 version of Frost, so nothing to blow your beans over. But yeah, it's looked upon as, classic image there. Great artwork of that fjord. The band, I think, went to the US on this album. They were very, very young and sort of unexperienced when it came. They did play live back in the day, but yeah, I recall them doing like a US tour with I think it was Incantation and maybe Absu or something like that. And a couple of shows in Mexico. So they were very young doing their first sort of overseas tour or something, I think. On this album, what can I say? It was like compared to Viking Liga Velde, which had very sort of long, drawn out passages, very sort of monotonous at times, repetitive, which I think, was the purpose of some of that material. With this one, it's a lot more faster and sort of brutal, and less of that sort of repetition going on and sort of long, drawn out passages. So quite a shift in sound. Also, it's a lot more sharper guitar wise. It was probably more of a warmth to Viking Liga Velde when it comes down to production style and stuff like that. So this one was, obviously matching the album title, Frost. They went for like obviously a colder sound. Interesting to note for me is that I feel that this is like the trademark guitar sound for Bjornsson. He sort of, once he got this sound, it sort of became his sound, I think. Not that he didn't have his own sort of style before that, but very sort of cold, thin. Obviously what on Monumention, they warmed it up a bit, got a bit more Sabbathy. But yeah, to me, this was the blueprint, I think, for his guitar style and sort of his sound, maybe. Opening with the fantastic intro, Frost. I love this intro. And Bjornsson doesn't get a whole lot of, kudos or whatever the word is, credit for his keyboard and synth playing, I think. He's done some great work over the years, whether it's with Enslaved or the early Borknagar material. I'll still stand by my statement, probably not on this channel, but like to mates of mine about, I think some of the best keyboards in black metal are on that first Borknagar album, and that was Ivar Bjornsson. So just had a really, really great sound back in that early 90s when it came to keyboards. And I think he's like an understated purveyor of the keyboards. When you think of keyboard greatness or keyboard players in black metal, you think of like these fancy top hat wearing guys from Dimmu Borgir or maybe an Isan or something like that. Whereas I think Bjornsson was fantastic at writing it. So and got a really good sound, I thought. So yeah, starting off with the great keyboard intro Frost, breaking into the opening track Loki, which very brutal sort of a track. I mean, the opening section is sort of more epic, it's long, that sort of drawn out bit, but then it really busts into that aggressive drumming, and I'd say it's quite chaotic drum wise for Trim. Obviously it was some of his, probably his fastest material up until that point. Viking Liga Velde had quite fast stuff, but I think this was taken to the next level, and he's probably at the, for his capabilities at the time, we obviously knew what he'd do on, say, anthems, but he was right at the cusp of his abilities, I think, on this album, because one of the things that threw me off about this album when I first heard it was that I thought it was verging on sloppy drum wise. He always seemed to hold it together with it. You're always on edge because I felt it was going to fall apart, but it never does. He always brings it back. And even like on anthems, for instance, I always felt that was sort of on the edge of careering off a cliff drum wise, but he always held it together. And I think that was something interesting about Trim's drum work. He's got a very, he's got his own style, but I never thought he was the most sort of tightest drummer. I always thought Frost was quite a tight drummer for that style. But I thought Trim had a wildness about him that sort of kept you on the edge of your seat. But yeah, Loki, great start. Pretty much just a fist in the face for an opener. Fenris comes in with Gritler, sort of doing the spoken word thing, just solely his voice, nothing around it, no keyboards, just him saying something in Norwegian, then busting into an almost like folk-like guitar riff, I'd say. Just one guitar and bass I can hear, and then the other guitar sort of chimes in on one of the other sides of the left or right. I can't actually recall now, but it's definitely one of the other guitars sort of chimes in after the opening section. Yeah, I mean, Fenris was probably one of the tracks I did like a lot when I first heard this album, and one of the songs that I could grasp onto. Fantastic song. Some nice keyboard, acoustic guitar bits as well over the electric guitar, which would sort of focus, would become a part of Enslaved, and also particularly on the next album, Eld. But I mean, that's probably a big Bathory influence. Quorthon was big on that, on like Twilight of the Gods and Hammerheart and stuff like that. Yeah, so Fenris, great track. Track 4, I think, is one of their best tracks ever, and that's Svarte Vidder. Sort of sounds a bit off at the beginning, a bit messy drum-wise, but there's just some really interesting sort of riffs, and I can hear certain riffing in this that would push over into what was happening on Eld. So yeah, like a really interesting track, a bit more sort of some more mid-pace stuff in there as well, and some really nice keyboard work. Yggdrasil is the next track, and that's like a not an instrumental, but like an acoustic sort of track with clean singing, mouth harp and stuff like that. It's really great atmospheric track. Probably not my favorite song on the album, but it's a good track to sort of break up the album, and it's situated right in the middle as well, so obviously there for a purpose. Jotunblod, what can you say? Just a punch in the face again. Just brutal, aggressive song. Nice breakdown in the middle with the goes into like a more slower section. Fast double kick, but sort of slower compared to the blasting that's gone before. Has a great sort of laugh in it, a cackle, and a deep demonic sort of laugh in it, which I love. I love that sort of stuff. And Enslaved used to have those sort of cackles and laughs on their albums a lot back in the day. Track 7, I won't even know how to pronounce this one. Gylfaginning. We'll go Gylfaginning. We'll do that one. Again, great song, sort of a deep cut. Can't really, it's definitely not up there with, say, Svarte Vidder or Fenris, but definitely a really cool song. Wotan, again, another deep sort of track, which when they play live, they tend to focus on like a Loki or Fenris or something like that. I've never really seen them play. Jotunblod's obviously one that they play, but unless they're doing the album in its entirety, you never hear them busting out like a Wotan or Gylfaginning or something like that. Probably up there with one of the best songs on the album, I think, is the final track, Isida's Dronning, opening with great acoustic guitars and just a very epic vibe. More of a laid-back sort of song, not a whole lot of speed in it. When it does speed up, it's more of in the sort of it's not in the ultra blasting. It's sort of done at half pace, but with a sort of blast beat. Really great track. But I think the acoustic guitar sort of shines on that song. So 9 tracks, 50 minutes. Sort of looked upon as a classic. I'm trying to think of how it was perceived at the time. I remember some people were raving about it. Some magazines I saw, said it was okay, but it didn't sort of, blow certain sections of the scene away. Things were very different back then when it came to praising stuff. Things weren't just praised outright, and negative opinions were pretty hardcore, from what I remember. So I don't really remember Enslaved getting a whole heap of praise for a long time. But yeah, this album definitely made a mark for Enslaved, I think, in various ways. You know, it's sort of first album on Osmos. They were able to tour for it. You know, you got the artwork, which was very striking. People always remember that imagery. Speaking of imagery, you know, like the photos of the guys. You got Bjornsson wearing the gimp mask and stuff like that. Which I remember him saying something along the lines of he was trying to, or he was influenced by the In the Sign of Evil cover by Sodom. So yeah, but regardless of his intent when it came to wearing the mask, you know, people would like to mock it and stuff like that. But, you know, it was different wearing the mask. And then you got the guys wearing the full Viking sort of stuff. Very, it stuck in people's heads. You know, when it comes to Grieg Harlan sounds, it's sort of, you know, the other one was Viking League of Eld was Grieg Harlan, but again, like I said earlier, it was a lot warmer sounding. This one brought in the real iciness, maybe of even like a probably more leaning to like a pure Holocaust sort of sound. Maybe that's just a, you know, a really bad example, but I'm just trying to float it out there of what I could compare it to. Yeah, and just looked upon as a classic. I probably don't consider it a total classic or anything like that, but it's you know, it's definitely influential, and it's earned its place in the pantheon of Norwegian black metal slash albums of that period. You know, I'm reluctant to call Enslaved black metal because they obviously aren't, but there's no denying their alliance with that scene, and they, you know, they were close with those guys and born out of that. So yeah, great album, but yeah, just sort of not like a 10 out of 10 or an In the Night side of clips for me, but and it was an album I had to really work for. So up next we have, let me just find it on the Great Metal Archives, but we have the Eld album, which, you know, 97, I'll check the exact dates, but what, it would be 3 years. This one came out in March, so 2.5 years. And it was recorded during late 96 into early 97. So again, not much of a turnaround when it came to recording. So when it came to Eld, different artwork, obviously different album, but like you know, you got Frost and Eld obviously translates to fire in Norwegian. So the red tinged artwork and the striking artwork of Eld. And this is not a great version because it's black and white and a later LP version from Osmos. But yeah, anyone who's got the original or the CD, it looks way sort of redder. Musically, what can you say about the opening track? I mean, it just complete different to what had happened on the previous album. You know, you got this massively slow build up to 793 Slugget om Lindisfarne, one of the greatest epic songs ever. It's just an absolute classic. No real you know, the fast bits are, you know, without doubt blast beats, but it's done in a way more measured and sort of off kilter sort of way than what Trim was doing. Speaking of that, before I go and dissect the actual songs, I should talk about the actual lineup change. So Trim's obviously left in the meantime after Frost and joined Emperor, and he would play on their Anthems to the Welcome at Dusk album. So in comes Mr. Harold Helgeson for Eld, a guy I didn't even know and still don't really know much about. From what I did read back in the day, he sort of came from a non-extreme metal or black metal background and sort of, yeah, probably didn't really play a lot of fast stuff, was more into more progressive music, I think. And you can really hear that, you know, on the material, particularly even the slower sort of mid-pace sort of stuff. He's more adept at hitting the cymbals and flicking around rather than, brute force like a trim, I would say. But still a very unique drum performance on this album and a very unique production coming off the back of Eld, and just for, I'd say, Grieg Harlan in general. Just the guitar sound is like very clean, hardly any distortion. I don't want to say an AC/DC guitar sound, but it's just very jangly, very almost hard rock like. Drum sound is like cardboard boxes, and a very tight snare. Pearl Jam versus snare sound or something like that. Yeah, very odd sound. I remember being thrown off by the production when I heard it when it came out in '97, and yeah, so a very odd sound, not very sort of roomy, and sort of not a whole heap of reverb. There's reverb in the slower sections when you've got like the choir type voices of Gritler when they're playing. They've got the key, not the keyboards, but the acoustic stuff over the more slower, heavier stuff, and then that sort of brings some room and sort of massiveness to the sound. But overall, it's quite compact and quite just an odd sounding album. But that doesn't sort of discount the actual quality of the song. So yeah, opening track 793, Slugget om Lindisfarne. Just such a great track. You got that slow build up with the keyboards, again highlighting Eva Bjornsson's fantastic keyboard ability. Sort of going into strummed, clean guitar stuff, and I don't even know what beat that is, but very sort of mid-pace, sort of going on, then into some faster stuff. The middle bit is just unbelievably epic, just almost like traditional heavy metal type doomy sort of elements going on there. Absolutely fantastic song. Just me talking about it is sort of not even doing it justice, and I should just shut up about it now. Moving into the next track, The Man from Hordaland, or should I try the Norwegian version? Hordalandingen. Yes, I nailed that. An upbeat sort of rocky type, yeah, like a very, maybe online with what Fenrir's was, but probably still a bit more rocky, maybe from the previous album. Again, going into some faster stuff as well, and it's got this sort of galloping section with the clean voice going over it. Harold Helgeson's doing like a gallop sort of with the double kick work, and yeah, just a really interesting track. Alpha Blut, Sacrifice to the Elves, I think it's called in English. I could be wrong. Yes, I think I'm wrong. Anyway, track 3, Alpha Blut. Probably one of my favorites outside of the opening track. I think it's got a great sort of clean vocal section in it. It's obviously a mix between the ultra fast sort of scathing riffing of Bjornsson, and then just got this awesome epic vibe when Gritler's clean voice. And that's another thing to say is that I think Gritler's voice gets sort of forgotten about of how good it was with the clean stuff. Obviously, he had Herbrand Larsen come in. Maybe, I think, was it Issa? He came in and basically took over the clean vocals. And then Gritler just took care of the grim stuff. But I always missed his clean voice. I thought he'd done a great job on those earlier albums. But yeah, Kvase's Blood, not one of my favorites. It's a good song. It's got a great high-pitched schmear from Destruction type scream at the end. But there's just, it is a good song, but it's sort of lacking some of the great moments that, say, the opening 3 tracks have. Bolenga Siden. Again, another cool track. It's got the opening with the chickens clucking and whatnot, and a guy sort of speaking in Norwegian. It's actually, it's a really cool the riffing is sort of isn't something else that's on this album. It's very, I don't know, individual compared to some of the other riffing on here. More single string sort of stuff going on. But yeah, a very strong track. I actually think this album is sort of strong. Opening 3 tracks are strong. Kavai's Blood, when I'm going through it now, is probably the least my least favorite song. So it's sort of like the first 3 are great. Slight drop, even though I enjoy that song. And then the last 3, it picks it right up again. Glemt, which I think must have been a very early track that they wrote, because I do remember having a like a bootleg video or a DVD of when they played on the US tour on the Frost album, and they did a version of Glemt. And so this must have been one of the very early tracks that they had written for Eld. Again, fantastic track, really melodic. What can you say? Eld, the final track, is probably my second favorite song on the album. There's just something about it. The little breakdown after the opening thing, that just there's something about it. Great strumming of the guitar and sort of just the melodies over the top of that. And then also like the theme of the album would be like the more slower chords with the flourishes of the acoustic guitars as well, and then Gritler's sort of great sort of clean vocals on top of that, and this has got that big time. So compared to the Frost album, just a complete different sort of ball. Frost is the more violent, in your face album. This is way more epic, and a different sounding album. And obviously, when you move on to the next few albums, completely different. After this album, they decided to go away from Grieg Harlan Studios, and they spent a couple of albums in Abyss, my least favorite studio of that time. But they did come back to Grieg Harlan for Monumention, from what I remember. Again, I also think it sort of notes the diversity within the productions you'd get from Grieg Harlan. When you look at the first 3 Enslaved albums, you got a warmer, big sound, then you've got a more scathing, icy sound with Frost, and then you get this, which I can't even put in the words how you describe it, particularly the drum sound. Just shows what a master Pitton was, and giving each band or each project or album its individual sound and what it sort of deserved. So again, I could have picked a lot of different Enslaved couplings of albums, but I opted for these 2. Earlier on in the career, I thought it was a good change up, and a good duo to do as the second volume of this back-to-back series. Eld, to me, is the stronger of the 2. I get a lot more from it, probably because it's probably a bit more epic in scope. The drumming is different, it's a bit more solid, but also more rooted in the sort of mid-pace sort of traditional heavy metal stuff, I'd say. He does blast, but that's actually when I feel that Harold Helgeson seems a bit more not out of his depth, but it's not his strong point. But other than that, it's a great drum performance. So for me, Eld is the better album. And there we go. Volume 2 of back-to-back series here on the Nameless Metal podcast. Although I might have to change the name, because I'm not doing the podcast as much anymore. I tend to be focusing more on doing these videos rather than putting stuff up on Spotify. So who knows? I just can't be bothered changing the name, so I'll stick with it for now. But this is the end of volume 2 of the back-to-back series. I'll rack my brain to do another couple. But it's just sort of breaks up the monotony of doing other things, So anyway, thank you very much for listening, watching. Hopefully this was somewhat enjoyable. If not, there's always a lot of other crap to watch. See you later.